This is one of the neatest thrills, and I guess I can say that it's one of the things that keeps me in radio, just being able to talk to people who really excite me. And Steve Allen has been one of my favorites, if not my favorite comedian for many, many years. But Steve, you actually are much more than a comedian. You're a composer, an author, a musician. Have I left anything out?
Oh, probably, but it doesn't matter. That may seem impressive from one angle, but on the other hand, even when I'm doing a TV show or working in a nightclub, I could be out of work in 6 other fields.
What's your favorite?
There really isn't any one favorite, Ken, because all the activities are so different. It's obviously very pleasurable, let's say, when you hold in your hand the first copy of your latest novel, but I can't say that that's any more or less pleasurable than turning on the radio and hearing Bing Crosby sing one of my songs. They're just two different kicks. You know?
Uh-huh. I know the 2 songs that come to mind immediately for me are This Could Be the Start of Something Big, and, of course, you wrote the lyrics to the Gravy Waltz.
Yes.
Could you list a couple others?
Well, let's see. There's South Rampart Street Parade and Picnic. There's one that's a big number in the hillbilly musical circuit. Well, Let's Go to Church Next Sunday Morning. And we did mention Gravy Waltz, Impossible. And there have been a number of other... Oh, let me see. One of Jerry Vale's hits that's just been reissued called Pretend You Don't See Her, My Heart.
Uh-huh.
And An Old Piano Plays the Blues, one that Nat Cole did some years ago.
We're always amazed when we just thumb through the library and glance sometimes at who writes songs. You and, of course, Charlie Chaplin's name appears also. Some names in comedy that you normally don't associate with music.
Yes, Chaplin wrote the song called Smile. It was the theme of one of his pictures.
Mm-hmm. Right. You're at the Lake Geneva Playboy Club, and you're appearing there till Sunday night, in fact, through Sunday night. What is it that you do in nightclubs?
I've been working in nightclubs for the last 25 years or so. I do naturally primarily a comedy show, but also some singing and some piano playing.
Mm-hmm. I suppose your nightclub show is similar to what you do on television, right?
Well, in the sense that it's me, yes, but it's not exactly. In other words, I don't sit down at a desk, and interview people. Mm-hmm. It is stand-up comedy.
I would imagine, and tell me if I'm wrong, Steve Allen is not going to go along with the current trend toward pornographic comedy, right?
No, I've never seen any reason why I should. I think maybe some people do because it's a very easy way to get a laugh. Anybody will laugh at a dirty joke, although later they're not maybe glad that they did. I don't mean to sound like a prude, but I think that whole trend is just one indication of the general disintegration of our society.
Do you think comedy reflects the times, or do you think comedy can lead to disintegration of morals?
It can both, do both. It can uplift, which is true of the arts generally. The arts can be an uplifting, educational, enlightening force, or they can hasten degenerative processes already underway, and in some cases perhaps be one of the contributing causes to them. As regards comedy generally, yes, it always, in some degree, reflects society, because you have one kind of comedy in China, and another in Argentina, and another in the United States. But comedy in general is vigorous and healthy in our country today.
When you did The Tonight Show, were you nervous? I've never had a chance to talk with Johnny Carson, but I've always wondered, how much pressure is a performer on night after night when he has to do The Tonight Show?
Well, nervousness, at least in my case, has practically nothing to do with the matter. And doing a talk show, whether it's on at night or in the afternoon, is actually a pleasurable experience if you're talking about one show at a time. In answering this question some time back, I made the comparison with a party. If someone said, listen, we're inviting you to a marvelous party tomorrow night, you'll have Orson Welles and Jane Meadows and Benny Goodman and President Ford, whatever, 4 interesting people, you'd say, oh boy, that sounds like a great idea, sure, I'll go. But if the next morning the guy called you up and said, okay, last night's party was great, right? Fine. Now I sentence you to go to a party like that every night for the next 7 years, then you'd say, oh, well, now wait a minute, that's a little rich, you know. So it does get to be a grind after a few years. Jack Parr couldn't take it anymore after 5 years, and 3 years was enough for me. I really marvel at the fact that Johnny's stayed in there for about 15 years or so.
Do you get a kick out of hosting the show from time to time?
Yeah, that's always a pleasure. I wouldn't want to do a 90-minute a day operation again because it knocks out too much time that I would like to devote to other activities. But filling in occasionally for Johnny or for Merv is always a pleasure.
Mm-hmm. You started out, or in fact grew up in Chicago, did you not?
Chicago's as close to a hometown as I have. Yes, I was born in New York and have lived in a number of other places, but Chicago's my main hometown.
And you got your start in show business in radio, did you not?
Yes, I worked originally in radio in a Phoenix, Arizona station.
Do you recall the story that you mentioned in Bigger Than a Bread Box about copywriting and faking a piece of copy?
Oh, yes, writing commercial copy, yes. You want me to tell that here now?
Could you do that?
Well, as briefly as possible, I used to write the bulk of the commercials for the station, for the Arizona network at that time. And as you know, being in the business, but the average person might not, when they hear an announcer doing a commercial, he's generally reading it out of a whole book of commercials. And if you're on the board, let's say from noon till 4 in the afternoon, then there's a certain group of commercials which are set up on a kind of a stand for your use, and there are the times specified when they're supposed to be read. And so I used to occasionally forge one of the commercials because I thought the announcers really weren't paying attention to what their mouths were saying. So I would take a piece of the paper on which I had written the original commercial and make a duplicate of it. But after the first 3 or 4 lines, the commercial would very slowly turn into total nonsense. And then I would set my alarm for the time of morning when the guys were supposed to read these things. I'd wake up about 2 minutes before and lie there in bed and laugh my head off as they read this total gibberish. And then finally they would realize they'd been had.
You have another story, and I'm not going to ask you to relate it, but if people can still get a copy of Bigger Than a Bread Box, it's all about your experiences in a men's clothing store as a youngster, and that is hilarious. In fact, that book is hilarious. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, I worked for the old Washington Shirt Company downtown in Chicago when I was a kid, and those are my experiences there.
Did you have to push to be recognized? I know you're a man of as much talent as anybody could hope to have, but did you have to push very hard to get recognized and get to the point where you are?
Not really, Ken. Largely, I think, because I just happened, by the accidents of one's personal history, to get started at the time that television itself was getting started. In other words, I got started in TV then, which was about 1950. I had worked a little in 48 and 49 in local television in Los Angeles. But in the 50s, it was network. And television itself then, as you will probably recall, was far more important than it is now, or than it can ever be again, simply because we're now used to it. It's like, the seamless automobile or something now. We take this all for granted. But in those days, people would stand in line to watch a television set, even if a test pattern was on. So you didn't even have to be good in the 50s, the early 50s. You just had to be on, and you were sort of an immediate... some kind of a star anyway, whether you were good or not.
Mm-hmm. So you'd say it was easier to break in than today?
Well, I'm not sure it was. Yeah, I guess, come to think of it was, although that's a separate question. What I was trying to convey was that if you were on television, you became immediately nationally famous simply because you were on. There were many people who were on and were lousy, and they became as famous as the people with talent.
I see.
Eventually it got a little harder. Eventually it did help to have some talent. Mm-hmm. But even now it's not totally necessary.
I guess I agree with you, because to me, a lot of shows that are on the air right now, I constantly wonder why they're still there.
The whole nation is puzzled by a lot of that stuff. The guys who make the decisions as to whether to put those shows on or not, I don't think they really talk enough to people around the country. They might make some other changes if they did.
Uh-huh. How much did you have to say as far as what went on the old Tonight Show, the Steve Allen Tonight Show? You did some crazy stunts. Did you write those, or were they just thought up by other people?
We had mainly 2 writers, Stan Burns and Herb Sargent, on the old show, and then I think after the second year, I think we got another couple of fellows. But we had very close to total freedom. The network initially had some ideas, but they got out of our way after a while. They initially wanted to have reviews of plays and, if you can believe it, ski condition reports. And I tried to explain to them that a very small percentage of 1% of people gave a damn as to what the ski conditions were, because most of them didn't live where it was snowing anyway. So they gradually stopped bothering us with that sort of thing and just let us do whatever we wanted.
Of course, Jack Parr's famous incident with the water closet is an example, I suppose, of how times have changed on television and what you can get away with. Do you think generally the family hour was a good idea?
Gosh, I don't really know. I think it was an attempt to do something about the fact that television was simply getting too dirty, in my personal opinion and in the opinion of many people. So that was the philosophical rationale for the family hour. But then I suppose there were problems about it, too. But I don't think sometimes people in Los Angeles or New York in the industry really know how displeased a good many people around the country are about dirty stuff on television.
Where do you think television is going?
Oh, Lord, I don't know. That, again, is such a large question. You'd have to write a couple of books to answer it. It'll, I think, generally produce more of the same. There are some areas in which it's much better today than it was 20 years ago. And the technical area, for example, the coverage of a football game or the Olympics, and I'm in the business, it just astounds me, the technical mastery and the expertise that goes into that.
In fact, some of the bicentennial coverage amazed me.
Yes, that was a perfect example. The television is still just brilliant and highly competent at establishing and covering what's happening right now in many places. And they have people who can explain it to us. And in that way, it's really a remarkable thing. And also in the area of situation comedy, the programs are much better today, by and large, than they were in the 50s. But as regards sketch comedy, they were much better in the 50s than they are today.
As far as a performer is concerned, and I know there's a lot of probing going on in Washington now with political figures, do you miss privacy, or are you able to lead a fairly private life?
I think Jane and I lead a pretty private life. Yeah, we're more home-oriented people, and we hardly ever go to nightclubs unless we're in Las Vegas and there's some act we want to see. Drinking doesn't mean anything to us, and partying. We like to have small dinner parties with our dear friends in the business, or out of the business for that matter. And Jane is a very good homemaker and entertains. We had a party at the house several weeks ago for just about all the comedians in town, and we had everybody from Groucho and Bob Hope on Sideways there. Our favorite company, I guess, is comedy writers and comedians.
Who did you model yourself off after? Anybody in particular?
Well, I had one man who was an idol of mine, but much to my dismay, I don't see any trace of him in my work, and I wish there were some. That was Robert Benchley. I got hooked on Benchley when I was about 14, I think. Saw him in a couple of movies. He made a number of films, as you know, and wrote, of course, many hilarious books. His books are still the funniest, I think, written. And I was kind of a Benchley fanatic. I would look at old bookstores to find anything he'd written and love it all. But as I say, I don't really see any influence in my performing.
Maybe that's a sign of where we're going. His grandson, well, he wrote comedy. He wrote a book about a shark.
Yes, it's a very talented family. His son is a writer and his grandson. But he still is my real favorite as a funny man. And he was also a very gifted natural actor. He was a journalist, as you know, chiefly by profession, a humorist. But acting is, I think, primarily really a matter of basic gifts, as his artistic function generally. And Benchley was a superb natural actor. If you see his old performances, you'll never see him read a line on naturally.
I've mentioned the book Bigger Than a Bread Box, which is 10 years old now. You have another one out called Smock Smock.
Yes, that's Doubleday publish most of my books, and this one is another collection, somewhat like Bigger Than a Bread Box, a collection of humorous odds and ends, funny television sketches, and magazine articles I've written, and that sort of thing. And,
of course, you have the TV show that's called Laugh Back, that's around the country.
Yes, that's syndicated in most parts of the country, and as the title suggests, it brings back... reunites, I should say, a lot of the great funny men who worked with me on my past comedy series, Louis Nye and Jonathan Winters and Mort Saul and Don Knotts, and Gabe Dell, Tim Conway, Jim Neighbors, all those fellas.
Let me ask you one more question, Steve. What kind of a day do you normally lead? Do you put a lot of hours in doing different activities?
Well, one day is very likely to be unlike the one before it or after it. I live about 10 minutes from my office in Los Angeles, and about 4 days a week, I put in quite a few hours at my desk. I might go there at 11 in the morning or noon and work till 5:30, closing time. Then I do my music writing anywhere, either at the piano or just in my head in the car or in the bathtub. And if I'm naturally involved with a television project, much of that work is done at a studio. So it depends on what I'm doing at the moment.
I understand that, well, comedy writing it can be a 24-hour thing. You carry a tape recorder with you now.
Yes, I started that, quite a few years ago. I don't know how many, maybe 7 or 8. Carry one of those little handheld jobs you can just stick in your pocket. And it's usually filled with a 90-minute tape. And whenever I get a worthwhile idea, whether it's a letter or a joke or a song or an office memo or whatever, I just talk it right into the machine, and I'm therefore able to produce a much greater volume of work than I was before I started doing that.
I know you're a very, very busy man, and I want to tell you, Steve, I have a lot of people I admire, but you have to be right at the bottom, right at the top.
Well, that's very kind of you, and I appreciate you calling, and nice to talk not only to you, but to your many listeners.
And we invite the people to head up to the Lake Geneva Playboy Club and take you in, either now or through the weekend, in fact, Sunday night.
Terrific. Well, we'll look for your listeners, and thanks so much for calling.